Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something totally fascinating. We're going to explore a centuries-long human drive that we can call the sovereign impulse. Basically, it's this persistent, recurring urge people have to build alternative, highly aligned communities that operate completely outside of the traditional nation-state. We're going to cross centuries, jump from raw history to high-tech, and look at how people have continually tried to redraw the very boundaries of governance.
So, what actually connects 18th century Scottish rebels, a spiritual eco-village from the 1960s, and today's crypto-utopians? I know, it sounds a bit like the setup to a bizarre joke, right? But they all share a profound philosophical DNA. And remarkably, they all share a geographic anchor in one specific Scottish estuary. Let's get into it.
Here is the game plan for our explainer today. First, we'll look at the sovereign impulse. Second, Jacobites and divine right. Third, Findhorn, a spiritual state. Fourth, the cloud-first network state. And finally, when code becomes law.
Kicking things off with Section 1, the sovereign impulse, the gateway of alternative autonomy.
Our whole story is anchored physically in the Moray Firth, specifically Findhorn Bay up in the northeast of Scotland. This beautiful, constantly shifting coastal landscape has served as both a historic and a metaphorical gateway for alternative forms of sovereignty. From 18th century blockade runners secretly delivering supplies in the dead of night, all the way to a modern intentional community building eco-houses out of recycled whiskey barrels. These sands have witnessed a continuous stream of people trying to escape the legacy state and build something fundamentally different.
Moving right along to Section 2, Jacobites and divine right, rejecting the state.
We absolutely have to start with Jacobitism. The Jacobite movement aimed to restore the exiled House of Stuart to the British throne. But it wasn't just some simple dynastic squabble, it was a profound clash of political theology. The Jacobites completely rejected the new parliamentary democracy that was established by the 1688 Glorious Revolution. They believed in the divine right of kings and indefeasible hereditary succession. To them, authority just wasn't something you could vote on or change with a piece of paper in Parliament. Imagine completely rejecting the very foundation of your country's government because you genuinely believe a higher power demands it.
And this ideological conflict wasn't just abstract theory. It escalated into physical warfare. Starting with the deposition of the Catholic King James VII and II in 1688, we see decades of resistance. What's amazing for our story here is that in March 1746, a French ship called Les Bien Trouvé successfully ran a British blockade right into Findhorn Bay to deliver reinforcements to the Jacobite insurgent state. This was just weeks before their final defeat at the Battle of Culloden. Findhorn was literally the physical gateway for this alternative sovereignty.
The idea of being accountable to God, not man or Parliament, really hits the nail on the head. This perfectly illustrates the core of the Jacobite mindset. They believed parliamentary sovereignty was a total usurpation. By locating ultimate authority entirely external to the secular government, specifically in divine will and strict bloodlines, they created a model of a high alignment community that flatly, unapologetically rejected the laws of the legacy state.
That brings us to Section 3, Findhorn, a spiritual state.
Founded in 1962, the Findhorn Eco-Village sits right on the edge of that very same Findhorn Bay. Now, instead of military rebellion, Findhorn's founders aimed to create a heaven on earth based on sustainability and spirituality. But listen for the echo of the Jacobites here. Findhorn prioritized inner listening and spiritual law over secular rules. They too recognized a source of legitimacy, the divine within, that sits entirely external to the traditional nation-state.
It's fascinating to look at how these alternative sovereign entities actually manage their economies. Back in 2002, Findhorn launched its own currency, the Echo, which was managed by a community social enterprise called Ecopia, specifically to keep wealth local. Compare that with modern network state cryptocurrency. Both of these completely bypass traditional central banks. Where Findhorn issues paper and digital notes for local wealth retention, a network state uses digital tokens on a decentralized ledger for global autonomy. Both are incredibly practical experiments in economic sovereignty.
But alternative communities inevitably face crises, and that really tests their structural resilience. In 2021, Findhorn suffered devastating fires that destroyed key community buildings. To survive this, alongside some heavy economic pressures, the community actually shifted its entire structure. They moved away from a centralized foundation and formed a grassroots community benefit society, adopting a much more distributed, polycentric governance model. Essentially, they reorganized to create a protected membrane, allowing them to adapt and survive.
All right, let's jump to the 21st century with Section 4, the cloud-first network state.
So what exactly is a network state? As defined by tech entrepreneur and theorist Balaji Srinivasan, it is a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition. It completely flips the traditional model upside down. Instead of a nation starting with land and then forming a culture, a network state starts in the cloud with culture and code and only prints out into the physical world later on.
So how do you actually build this step by step? Well, Balaji's roadmap is surprisingly straightforward. Step 1, build a highly aligned community online. Think of it essentially as a social network with a shared, intense purpose. Step 2, as a community grows in wealth and trust, they start crowdfunding physical nodes, like apartments, houses, or even whole towns across the globe. Step 3, once the population and real estate footprint are large enough, they negotiate diplomatic recognition from legacy states. It's literally a blueprint for political entrepreneurship, completely without waging a physical war.
But here's the catch. What holds this digital community together before they ever actually meet in person? Srinivasan argues they need a one commandment, a core moral innovation. For example, imagine a community aligned entirely around adding 10 years to their citizens' lifespans. Or maybe a state dedicated to radical carbon negativity. What moral innovation would be so absolutely crucial to you that you would literally form a new society around it? That single crystalline moral principle acts as the ultimate unifying force, differentiating them completely from the legacy jurisdictions they're trying to exit.
Which leads us to our final stop, Section 5, when code becomes law, the grand synthesis.
We've talked a lot about external authority, but how does a modern decentralized community actually govern itself on a day-to-day basis? Well, the answer is on the blockchain. The ERC 3643 standard is a prime example. This is an institutional-grade smart contract standard used on Ethereum for permission tokens. Unlike regular crypto, where anyone can send anything, this standard inherently enforces compliance rules mathematically on the blockchain. Code literally, practically becomes law.
Here's how that governance functions programmatically under the hood. Through functions like contransfer, ERC 3643 validates identities on-chain before a transaction can even happen. It can automatically freeze tokens on non-compliant wallets or enforce maximum limits of investors globally. It completely bypasses the need for legacy state regulators or human intermediaries because the mathematical rules of the offering are embedded directly into the asset itself. The system enforces the community's boundaries automatically. No human intervention required.
Now here is where it all comes together in this shocking philosophical symmetry. The Jacobites believed authority flowed from God and hereditary bloodlines, allowing them to completely bypass Parliament. Today, the network state movement believes authority flows from immutable mathematics and decentralized code, allowing them to completely bypass the legacy state. Both of these movements represent an absolute, fundamental rejection of the traditional democratic state in favor of a higher, unquestionable, and objective authority.
And the parallels just keep going when we look at how these groups align. The Jacobites were bound by what we could call a sacred principle, their unyielding devotion to their political theology and traditional order. The network state is bound by the one commandment, their specific moral innovation. In both cases, this ideological glue serves the exact same function. It binds a community together tightly against the outside world, whether they're 18th century Scottish clansmen or 21st century digital neighbors living in the cloud.
And this brings our whole narrative full circle, right back to the shifting sands of the Moray Firth. Findhorn Bay has quite literally seen it all. It witnessed French ships running blockades for Jacobite insurgents back in 1746, and it supported a highly resilient spiritual eco-village navigating the modern world through grassroots community structures. The methods certainly change, from wooden ships and broadswords to community benefit societies and blockchain smart contracts, but that human drive for high alignment autonomy, it is incredibly persistent.
I want to leave you with this one final provocative thought. As technology allows us to align globally on our deepest values before we ever share physical space, we really have to ask, is the era of the traditional geographic nation-state actually beginning to give way? Are we entering a world defined by a network of high-alignment archipelago communities? It's a fascinating future to consider. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible synthesis with me today, and I really hope this explainer has given you a totally new lens through which to view human political organization.